various guises and lots of tea. He also complained of painful joints from all the squatting, but he believed that discomfort was necessary to gain satori. Asked if he had reached that enlightened state, he just laughed. The bamboo grove of Imagomano behind the temple became a favorite haunt. I liked the creaking sound of the long, thick bamboo stems and the energy of the new shoots pushing up the soil. They were already displaying the girth that they would have when fully developed. I was told the eerie squeaks coming from the grove were the sounds of the bamboo growing. I visited other famous temples like Kiyomizu-dera. I found a small, cheap inn near the Tofukuji, the Takeya Ryokan, which, by the way, we checked today, just finally ceased operating early this year, late last year, very recently. The old ryokan is gone, it's replaced by a modern house. The people, the descendants of the people that hosted me were still there. We might contact them. The Takeya Ryokan, its futons were thin and the rooms unheated except for a small hibachi brought in whenever I returned. A strong smell of disinfectant escaped from the central toilet when someone opened the sliding door, which rattled loudly on its rail. But the Takeya's owner and his family were friendly, very friendly, and the food was tolerable, and practicing frugality was good for the soul. There was so much work in the office that I could not afford to go out for lunch in Osaka. I was making long hours and frequently cancelled dinner at home. The hunger was attacked with Strong Boy brand chocolate and nut bars from Morozov. I bought them by the dozen. This bad diet worsened my stomach condition. Sometimes my discomfort in the office forced me to sit bent sideways behind my desk. This odd pose somehow eased the pain. Some of the women in the office worried for me, threw me worried looks. But their reserve prevented them from suggesting that I see a doctor. My Kyoto weekends were a badly needed balm on my shaky physical condition. But I was struggling with the classic problem of reconciling East and West in my own life. In my work, and when I was with friends, our language was Dutch or English, and our logic and thought patterns European. In Kyoto, I had to rely mostly on my limited Japanese and identify myself with a more tentative, less assertive mode of being. The endemic vagueness of the Japanese language appealed to the poetic streak in me. I was not sure whether a language shaped a people's character or vice versa, but I found comfort in knowing that Japanese lacked short, unambiguous equivalents of our yes and no. And that behind the sa's and and cocked heads, characteristic of many a Japanese conversation, there might be an awareness of the inadequacy of absolute statements. Shades of gray took the place here of our black and white, and a pensive nod signified the need for further thought and consideration, decision being premature or not desired. In 1957, I visited an exhibition at the Sankakudo Gallery in Kyoto, entitled Poems Before Words. The poems were by Paul Reps, a poet associated with the Beat generation. And they were written on washi, handmade paper which I had come to love for its subtle beauty, strength and irregularity. Reps's poems were very brief, freehand calligraphic texts, seldom more than a few words long, and accompanied by little Zen-like drawings. "Lose your unflower mind," said one, with a four-leaf flower that looked like an electric fan. "Forgotten string sings," was another, next to a black wavy line. My favorite was, "Drinking a bowl of green tea, I stopped the war." The washi poems, suspended from twine, strung horizontally across the airy space, were fluttering in the soft breeze coming through the open windows of the gallery. The poetry, the paper, the setting, it all touched a chord in me. I also bought his book, Zen Flesh, Zen Bones. There. Drinking a bowl of green tea, I stopped the war. The exhibition, with ticket prices ranging from 1,000 yen for car owners to 10 yen for lovers of Buddha, was a benefit for a Kyoto poet, Shimaoka Kenseki, whose wife was seriously ill in hospital. I paid 500 yen, as I did not own a car, and loving Buddha seemed to be too American a concept. I met both Reps and Shimaoka and bought a few of his poems. We ended up going out together and friendship blossomed. I went to see Reps in his ryokan in the picturesque village of Ohara, north of Kyoto. After he had returned to the States, we corresponded for a few years. In the following months, I spent many a weekend walking the streets of Kyoto with Shimaoka, following him around like an acolyte his master. And the master looked the part, a great basket-like Zen hat, topping his dark suited frame, his gaze always forward, his expressive mouth in a permanent, ironic smile. What he lacked in stature, he made up by the length of his strides, visiting up and down the hills he took me, in and out of temples and shrines and gardens, visiting artists and potters and monks and hermits. We shared meals in noodle shops and sushi joints, and drank to each other's health in disreputable Omiya behind the station, while sampling oden items from heated countertop tanks. Once Shimaoka and I met in Osaka over dinner at a small restaurant, which I patronized. It was called Kamikaze and was owned and run by a famous retired sumo wrestler by that name. I always went there alone and left it to Kamikaze to decide what I should eat. Thankfully, he never gave me chankon nabe. Shimaoka suggested an after-dinner drink. He knew a small bar in Osaka called L'Amour, and he wanted me to meet Suzuki Man-san, the madam, a former geisha. It was a simple place. With a bare concrete floor and only 3 or 4 hostesses. They slid off their stools to welcome us. One of them was very attractive, shy and pensive. Behind the bar stood a woman in her 80s, 50s, wearing a sober blue-gray kimono, the bar madam. Man-san. We talked. She lacked the coquettish manners of the archetypal bar madam and seemed more interested in the kind of person that I was than what I did for a living or how much I would spend. Sometimes she looked at me thoughtfully. It felt a little like visiting a kindly aunt. After a while, Man-san invited the pretty girl to join us and then asked her softly to show us her hands. She blushed, but when told it was all right, she opened them slowly. What we saw were 2 blackened palms. She was a Hiroshima survivor, her hands being the only part of her body that was exposed to the fatal flash. This done, she visibly relaxed. We could not stay long, but I promised to return, which I did 2 or 3 times. But although Man-san was always very kind, the place depressed me, and when the Hiroshima girl left, I stopped going. One day, a clear-eyed visionary with shining skin and splendid physique received Shimaoka and me in his Spartan tea house, which he had built on a wooded slope near Kyoto with the help of several followers. He prepared matcha for us, mixing tea powder and cold water from a well with a bamboo whisk, and served it in self-made pottery bowls. Noticing my interest in the delicate tea whisk, Shimaoka next took me to a whisk maker in Yase, a bosky village north of Kyoto. The whisk maker, a young man with a pretty wife holding a baby smiling behind him, lived in a small hillside house a few minutes up from the main road. I was impressed by the dedication with which this man practiced his noble but humble trade. I could only wonder about the precarious economic basis for this declining craft. But their courtesy and simple faith did not betray any doubt. Once again, I detected a quality in the Japanese attitude to life that in its very simplicity seemed superior to the more ambitious lives that we lived in the West. I purchased 2 of his beautiful whisks, one of which turned a lustrous dark with age I still have. The light was fading when we returned to Kyoto, and Shimaoka suggested a drink and a bite. We dropped in at an odenya, where we had been before. It was full of men seated on stools around the square wrap-around counter, with the mama-san in the center, stirring the oden under the shop's only lamp. We managed to squeeze in and ordered sake. The mood was jolly, and Shimaoka, contributing a story or 2, soon became the focus of attention. Then he began to boast about me, calling me the second Lafcadio Hearn. I told him to stop this exaggerated talk, pointing out that my knowledge of Japan could only be described as mere sengaku, shallow learning. I should not have said this, for Shimaoka took my choice of this particular term as proof of his claim. I squirmed under the unwanted attention and was grateful when the quiet young Caucasian man opposite me, who had been observing me through the smoke and steam, began to play his shakuhachi flute in the half shade. I moved over to listen, and when he finally struck up a conversation, I found out that he was an American Buddhist monk living in a nearby temple. I ended up accompanying him to his quarters, a spacious but bare room of perfect proportions and an abiding calm that seemed all the more intense for the keen autumn chill pervading it. On the tokonoma stood a 2 feet high Buddha image, and without any prompt from me, my shaven-headed friend kneeled down in front of it and began to play his flute again. It was another seminal moment of these richly sober Kyoto days, and although I never saw this man again, his quiet devotion, musically expressed, engraved itself on my memory. We also attended Kyoto's famous Jidai Matsuri and Gion Matsuri. One of Shimaoka's more interesting introductions was to a lady by the name of Ichida Yae. She lived with her teenage daughters in one of Kyoto's last grand mansions, built in traditional Sukiya style and set in extensive gardens surrounded by heavy walls that took up an entire city block. The Yae-san was the scion of an old established family of textile manufacturers, but she preferred the life of literature to that of business and had gained some renown as a poet. Admirers called her the 20th century Ono no Komachi, a legendary poet of the Heian period. She did have the same long, straight hair and wore her kimono usually Heian style, with the sash low and the neckline plunging. I cannot comment on the quality of her poetry, though it was certainly turned out in sumptuous editions. On New Year's Eve, 1957, I joined a group visiting the Yasaka Jinja in Kyoto's Gion district. The group, led by Shimaoka, included several of his friends, some of whom I had already met, and also Yae-san, Ichida Yae-san, as always a sight to behold in her mock Heian get-up. This was an annual Okeramairi, the obeisance to the Shinto deities enshrined at Yasaka. In the shrine's precinct, a large charcoal fire, the Okerabi, was burning in an iron basket held aloft on a huge tripod. Pilgrims would buy a straw rope from the shrine's office, and after setting it aglow at the fire, take it home, twirling it all the way to keep the tiny flame going. Once home, the New Year's first kitchen fire was lit with this small spark. The hundreds of tilting red circles moving through the cold and dimly lit streets resembled fireflies chasing their own tails. The crowd jostled against us, and we tried to negotiate our way out of the shrine compound, but we kept losing each other. Then suddenly I found myself alone with Yae-sama, with no trace of our other companions. I put a brave face on the situation and suggested a bite in a local bar before calling it a day. Yae-san graciously accepted. We gave our glowing ropes to some passing children and headed for the Ari no Naki Ie, a fashionable hangout. It was well past midnight when we sat down on stools at the long counter and placed our orders. Our arrival caused a minor flutter, which I did my best to ignore. Further down, I spotted Edward Seidensticker. a well-known translator of Japanese novels, including Tanizaki's, who had used the Ayasan as a model for one of his heroines. He gave us a friendly nod, no doubt recognizing the Ayasan. When it was time to pay, I found my wallet gone, obviously lost to a pickpocket at the shrine. Seeing me flustered, Mr. Seidensticker offered to help out, but the Ayasan insisted on taking care of the bill. The incident was watched with barely surprised curiosity by the bar's other patrons, further adding to my embarrassment. I met the Ayasan once more when she invited me to a party at her mansion to mark the publication of a new collection of her poetry. I'm sitting there, second from right. But I felt out of place in her circle, and I let the acquaintance lapse. I continued my wanderings around Kyoto with Shimaoka. The range and variety of his network was astonishing, and not confined to the eccentric and the artistic. Through him I got to meet, among others, a Nanga painter, living in a large house featuring a full-sized no stage, a manufacturer of electrical machinery, a gynecologist and his jolly family, the owner of an obi and kimono weaving mill, a celebrated management consultant whose lectures drew full